just a heads up, I am jet lagged. I traveled to South Korea on Sunday and arrived yesterday afternoon and jumped on a plane and came to Cape Town for this. So I do know it's Saturday, I do know I'm in Cape Town, but I am just all over the show. But I'll talk about why I was in Korea. I'm going to talk a little bit about piracy and AI and the Copyright Amendment Bill as well. But just to let you know a little bit about myself, obviously my name is Chola Makgamathe. I am the head of legal at SAMRO. I am also the chairperson of the Copyright Coalition of South Africa and Partners Against Piracy in South Africa. And all of that work is around advocacy for ensuring that we have copyright legislation that is fair and that protects the rights of creators and also ensures that the access to your works is done in a manner that is legitimate and that you're paid for it. So that's lots of words for some of the work that I do. But the reason I was in South Korea. So SAMRO belongs to an international organization called CSAC. SAMRO is what we call a collective management organization. We have one in South Africa, or a few in South Africa, but SAMRO specifically administers copyright for performance rights. You have your CAPASO, you've got SAMPRA, IMPRA, there are a few collecting societies. But in most countries in the world where copyright is administered and there's copyright legislation, you have collective management organizations. And we all belong to CSAC. And CSAC has various subcommittees that meet regularly, and I'm a member of what they call the Legal and Policy Committee. And all of us lawyers get together once a year, and we discuss issues that are affecting us. We discuss how best to deal with legal issues in our jurisdictions and other jurisdictions, talk about ideas, give presentations, give updates on case law, etc., etc. And the last 2 years, we've really focused on AI. Because it's such a rapidly developing area and it has such huge impact for copyright and how you earn and what you can do. And we don't have firm rules about what to do with AI as it pertains to copyright, and that then impacts how we deal with it. For instance, if you are members and you're using AI to create work. So a lot of the discussion this year was around registration of works. We don't recognize AI, right? Because works are created traditionally by humans. AI is machine. How do we deal with that? If somebody uses AI to create a work, do we recognize the AI component? We don't, because it's not in our law, but how do we deal with it? How do we split the human component in the composition vis-a-vis the arrangement, vis-a-vis the lyrics? So there's a lot of conversation about how to deal with AI because it's not regulated. There's an EU AI Act in Europe, and they're usually the first to market in terms of regulating a space. They did the same with the data protection legislation, which we've now adopted, more or less based on that in our country. But that AI Act itself doesn't really deal with copyright. Now, the speakers before me were correct. AI has its great uses and its great benefits for a number of industries. The difficulty with AI in copyright and the culture and creative industries is what's happening, and I know Anthropic was mentioned, is that copyrighted works that are legally protected and that people using should be paying for are now being used by companies like Suno, Anthropic, etc., to then ingest that work without paying for it, put it through the system, whatever it is, because that's what it does, generative AI. It takes all of this information, puts it through a system, and then creates something new that they can then copyright, and then they can make money off of. But the original creators of that work are not making money off of it. And most recently, I think a few weeks ago, there was a case that came out. A few hundred writers, book writers, sued Anthropic because they were using copyrighted material for training purposes, and they won. And there was a $1.5 billion settlement. And one of our writers, a gentleman called Zygmunt Da, is actually one of the writers that joined this class action suits against Anthropic. So when we use AI, particularly as a creative, like Karabo said, the test is originality. There's nothing new, original, right? We draw inspiration from other works. But in order for it to become a new work or a derivative, whatever the case may be, you have to apply a certain level of skill, time, effort, etc., which will then make it an original work that is now copyrightable and that you can earn money from. AI, unfortunately, the machine learning component does not do that, and that's where the danger is. So when you are using AI tools, I think be mindful as creatives, particularly because you need to get paid, that there is a consequence for using those tools by using copyrighted works and then creating something, whether it's new, whatever the case may be from that. So that's just some of the conversations that we were having. How do we register the works? How do we do the splits if we do? What principles do we apply in the middle of a situation where there is no legislation in most of our countries dealing with AI and copyright? So that was that conversation. Another thing that a big takeaway from my trip to Korea, and I'm now moving into the South African space, is that I don't know if you know how much the culture and creative industries contribute to the GDP of this country. A study was done by the South African Cultural Observatory a few years ago, and they actually quantified how much the CCIs contribute to this country. CCIs contributed 2019 3% to the GDP. That's on the same level as agriculture. But the way we are treated in our sector is appalling. We are hugely disrespected. They don't take us seriously. They don't regulate us appropriately. They don't put the right measures in place, et cetera, et cetera. And then you see the result of that in how the industries are managed. You see the result of that in how people are constantly dying as paupers. You see the result of that in the confusion and the lack of clarity about how to deal with the CCIs. But we are on par with agriculture. And you see how seriously they take agriculture. Why is that the case? They don't take the culture and creative industries seriously. So from a government perspective even, they don't take the culture and creative industries seriously, and you can see the results therein. Regulation of platforms, the huge illegal activity that's taking place in the culture and creative space, particularly in the digital space, is a problem because they don't take it seriously. Whereas Korea, and I don't know if you guys have seen the proliferation of K-pop, K-drama, Korean skincare, etc., etc. The difference between South Africa and Korea is that their government was intentional in its intervention to support the culture and creative industries and then curate this cultural product for export. And you see the result of that. K-pop, drama, whatever the case may be, has exploded. It has exploded, and that's because of the intentional interventions by the government that supports them. Also the intentional interventions to ensure that there isn't illegal activity or infringement taking place rampantly, as we see in South Africa. So that's one of the major things that I took away from that trip, which is interesting. And I think leading into the next sort of thing that I want to talk about around the Copyright Amendment Bill. We have copyright acts. Most jurisdictions have copyright legislation that needs to comply with a number of standards, some of them being international treaties, and the standards in those treaties ultimately is that when your work is being used, the creator or the author of the work must not be unduly prejudiced. So it must not harm the creator or the author. That means that, for instance, someone can't use your work in a manner that is illegal or immoral, whatever the case may be. Someone has to pay you for the use of your work. They need to get your permission for the use of your work. So there are those standards that we need to adhere to. We have a 1978 Copyright Act that doesn't take into account how consumption has changed. It doesn't take into account the digital era and some of the rights that have arisen as a result of how we're now using digital platforms for the consumption of content. It's old. And most people, if they talk about it, they'll say it's an apartheid act, which would be a fair description of what it is. And it needed amendment. So over 10 years ago, a process was started to amend that thing. Because, again, they don't take us seriously. They don't understand copyright. They don't understand how copyright affects the culture and creative industries. They don't understand that copyright is not something that's just about music. It affects writers, it affects audiovisual, it affects animation, it affects the CCIs and other industries across the board. So when you're drafting that legislation or amending that legislation, you need to understand that that's how it operates. They don't understand how the money is made. They don't understand how the operationalization of it. They don't understand the value chains. They don't understand. So they started drafting this thing, and hey presto, dog's breakfast. That's over 10 years ago. I joined SAMRO in 2017. SAMRO then became a member of the Copyright Coalition, which I'm the chairperson of, in order for us to advocate for a copyright legislation that made sense, that was fit for purpose. Because the current drafting now is such that, because they don't understand it, it's like playing sports, right? We all know what the rules for soccer are. We know what the rules for rugby are, netball, hockey, etc., etc. Imagine you go to a soccer match and then someone's trying to apply hockey rules or netball rules to rugby. That's how it's drafted. They treated it as a one-size-fits-all approach, as if the culture and creative industries are just one thing, which they're not. So in your drafting, you need to understand that if I draft X for music, this is how it applies to music. But not drafting X for music and then wanting to apply it to film and television. It just doesn't make sense. There will be total and utter chaos. And that's how the bill is currently drafted. Another problem that we have with the bill, and there are many, that's why I say it's a dog's breakfast. It's a scrambled egg, you can't unscramble the thing. Another problem that we have is that under normal circumstances for copyright, the rules of the game are that I know if I write a song, I know under what conditions you, for instance, can use that song. You must ask me for my permission, you must pay me. Which is where collective societies like SAMRO come to the fore, where the middleman between the creator of the work and the person or the entity that wants to use the work. We are there to say, okay, you want to use our members' works, pay a license fee, get the permission, we sign a contract, we then take our admin fee, and then we pay on royalties to ultimately the creator of the work. That's the current situation. In specific circumstances, there are what we call exceptions to copyright, where you don't necessarily have to get a license for the use of that work. In our legislation, we have fair dealing. It's called fair dealing. So the normal circumstances, and then in some circumstances, for instance, for some news or education, whatever, there are exceptions to copyright, but it's a closed list and it's a definite list. What our lovely parliamentarians then did with their lawyers is that they've now introduced what we call broad, extremely broad exceptions to copyright. So currently with the drafting, you will never know so you will know there's an infringement, right? That somebody's using your work without your permission. The problem is you can't then go to the text of the law and say, hang on, this is an infringement or this is not an infringement. If you reach a point where somebody uses your work and there needs to be, and it's not in the text, the listed items like it is now, you would then need to take that user to court to prove whether or not there's an infringement. So it's not clear. So you have a situation where creators, or even, that's a large part of my job, by the way, as well, infringements and contracts with licensing, et cetera, taking users to court, instituting legal action against them because they would, either they've got a license with us so they won't pay, or they don't have a license, and then we have to institute infringement proceedings because they're using the work. We would have to spend most of our time in court for a judge to decide whether or not there's been an infringement of copyright. That's the uncertainty that's being introduced into our law with the Copyright Amendment Bill. And we're not a very litigious country. In the States it might work. They've got hundreds of years of precedent for copyright cases. We're not that country. But now they've introduced this thing called moving from fair dealing to fair use, which would introduce uncertainty into our system. And another thing, like with this Anthropic case, it was a class action suit. So they got 1.5 billion, right? In South Africa, the way the Copyright Amendment Bill is currently drafted is that even if you go to court and you win the infringement case, the most the infringer will pay you is what they would have paid you had they licensed in the first place. So if your license is 10 Rand, right, and then you go and spend 10,000 Rand in litigation and you win, the most you will get is that 10 Rand. That's how they've drafted the law. So as you can imagine, it's been a constant fight for years. I've been at this since 2018, fighting with the legislator, fighting with, in the background with big tech users like the Googles of the world, because they were the ones who want this legislation to be passed as it is, because they would benefit. They will basically be getting free content, right? They don't want to pay. So fighting those types of big users to make sure that this bill is not passed. Other problem that we have is that it is linked with the Performance Protection Amendment Bill. This Performance Protection Amendment Bill deals with the rights of performers of works. So copyright is the rights of creators of works, whereas performers is performers of works. So even if you are a composer, for instance, as a creator of the work, you can still be a performer of the work and earn money from both sources. The challenge is you need to treat the copyright bill as the mother and the performers bill as the child, because without the creation you can't perform, right? It follows. So the performance bill has actually made some amendments to make the lives of performers easier. Problem is, if you pass the dog's breakfast, you're also going to kill the baby. Now, the performers have been advocating for the Performers Amendment Bill to be passed because of it's positive for them. And this has caused huge tension, because if you go on Google and you look it up, there's two sides to the story. There's two warring parties, like in the creative space to the story. You have creators and you've got performers, and in the background, obviously, the feud is being sponsored by whomever in the background, mostly big tech. And because the performers want this bill to be passed so badly, they don't care, and they don't understand that if you pass the one, you're going to kill the other. And that's the tension that we've had with performers, because that understanding is not there. They want what they want, and they want the bill passed. And unfortunately, I don't know the wisdom of our parliamentarians. The two are linked. There's cross-referencing, but the two are linked, so you have to pass one, pass all, which is why we are fighting so hard that they both should not be passed, because if you do pass the bill as it is, it's going to be years of litigation, years of uncertainty, and it will effectively kill copyright industries in South Africa. So music, film, television, it will affect broadcasting. And we all have our own interests. We all have our own interest. I know SAMRO pot shots everywhere about us and whatever the case may be, but there's a reason why we're advocating for this thing not to be signed as it is. So we've been fighting. Eventually, last year, it was referred by the president to the Constitutional Court, because he went through the parliamentary process. It had been referred by him once before. We lobbied, we made submissions, they ignored our submissions per usual, and they went through the parliamentary process, and the president sent it to the Constitutional Court, which he must do when it reaches that point. So we've all made our submissions to the Court. We are awaiting a ruling from the court to determine how we move forward. So a number of things can happen. They can say, well, it's constitutional, pass it as it is. Then we have a problem. Litigation, it will be tied up in court for years and years and years. Or they could say parts of it are not constitutional, therefore send it back to Parliament, but then we start from scratch, most likely. So all this work we've been doing for all of these years, we'll have to redo again. And remember, the legislative process is so involved. There's so much lobbying that needs to happen. When we were lobbying now, before the elections, we knew who to lobby, where each party stood, so we knew who to target. Now you have a GNU, the dynamics are different, the politics are different. So all of that plays into how things are drafted in the background that people don't see. So there's a lot of work that I do personally, that others do as well, to make sure that happens. Another problem, it doesn't take into account, like I said, AI, and how it affects copyright. So even if the thing is constitutional, it's redundant. It doesn't take into account piracy, digital content piracy, because again, at the time they started drafting, digital consumption was not what it is today. Streaming was not what it is today. So again, redundant. It's not in that text. Piracy is a huge problem. It's causing huge losses internationally, in the billions of dollars every year across the industries. In Nigeria, for instance, in their film and television industry, 75% of that revenue is lost because of illegal content streaming. And people are becoming very creative. You have illegal sites. You've got what we call stream ripping. People go to a movie and then they record thingy on their cell phone and then they put it on a site. You've got whole TV shows, movies, illegally placed on certain platforms, your YouTubes, your Facebooks, etc., etc. The content, the ability to access free content is just amazingly easy. Things like people sending each other books, whole books on WhatsApp, that's illegal. So there's a lot of behavior at a consumer level that is problematic, because people don't understand that piracy is actually copyright theft. It's a crime. And is punishable by law. But because society they don't make the connection between the consequences of consuming something for free, for even at a basic level. If you write a book or you write a song and you're unable to make money from it, and that's your primary source of income, you can't do things like pay for school fees, pay for bond, pay for the things that people who go to work pay for. It's like walking into a shop, taking a loaf of bread, and then walking out. You don't. When it comes to content, there is that thinking that I can just use it for free, and it's easy and it's accessible. So those are the things that we also, a lot of work I do in that space as well. And an organization which is championed by MultiChoice Group, an initiative called Partners Against Piracy was formed in order to start dealing with these issues, because there is a huge awareness issue. around users, even individual users who don't know that what they're doing is wrong, they don't know that it's a crime. We need technological solutions for it, so things like watermarking or being able to take something down if you note it, you pick something up, those kinds of things. And we need legal and policy solutions. And currently, the legal and policy solutions are limited. So, for instance, again, the thing about copyright is that because it's so vast, it needs to be dealt with from a multi-stakeholder perspective. So there are copyright issues there. There are other issues that need to be dealt with by the Department of Communications. So currently, for copyright, right, that is under the realm of the DTIC, the trade and economic aspect of it. But it also sits with the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, who don't do very much for the culture and creative industry. So it's sitting there currently. There are issues impacting copyright in the Department of Communications because of all these digital platforms, and that's within their purview. There are issues affecting copyright in the Department of Justice because there's a crime involved. So in order for you to prosecute or whatever the case may be, you then need to be able to have police officers who understand that copyright theft is a crime, right? Judges and magistrates who know how to prosecute. And so there's a lot that needs to be done, but it's sitting all over the place. And that's why you need an intentional leadership, an intentional government who will understand that this is what this animal looks like and this is how it needs to be regulated so that our creators in our country are able to make money from the creation of their works. So broadly speaking, that's what I wanted to share with you. Be careful with the AI, guys. Use it, but just be conscious of the fact that these big guys are using copyrighted content as training data, and then making money off of it, and creators are not seeing the benefit of that. And there is quite a bit of litigation happening. Like I said, Anthropic, our sister society in one of the European countries, I just forget, sued Suno and OpenAI as well, so we're waiting for that judgment. Some big music publishers have also sued some AI platforms as well, so we're waiting for those judgments. So right now, everything that's coming out is on the basis of litigation, which is costly. So only the big guys can effectively fight. And then we've got our friend Trump in the States, who's also causing an infinite amount of chaos around the copyright space. So the AI and copyright space. So it's a moving target. We're looking at the developments, we're trying to keep up, we're trying to move with it as quickly as possible to ensure that, in particular for our members, we're able to protect their interests, because that's a huge part of our job. So thank you for taking the time to listen to me, and
So we are going to have time for 2 questions. Chola said she's not that hungry, so maybe she'll eat quick, and then after lunch you can ask her more questions. But I see 2 hands. Can we do that question? Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jermaine from George. So I drove 5 hours to be here last night after school. Part of what I do today started at a conference like this many years ago when I was still a student at UCT, and I love that side now because I felt Cape Town is too oversaturated. They have everything here, so let's go to George where there's nothing and start there. So I'm there for 6 years now, and we're growing. So I do music. I'm a full-time music teacher, teaching grade 8 to 12 music. And I have a music academy as well, after hours, where I service other schools. Doesn't have music as a subject, so I go and source talented learners, and I teach them for free with some of my, I don't know how we get it right, but we do it. So the question I have is, I have 2 questions actually, but the one is related to the music license that came out. I'm not sure how far you guys came with some of our, I don't know if there's educational people in the room, but we were told that they're coming for us with regards to using music as an educational tool. So can you maybe clarify that, because we are very scared, because we don't have money. So it's schools and academies and everything, And what's happening is that a lot of these academies is a huge aid to the education department that does these lessons because they don't have the capacity in school for music teachers, so they outsource it to the academies. So now we're scared that you're going to come for us as well. So if you can clarify that one, and the other one is, what can I do, or what can we do, let me not make it too personal, make it too George, but local radio stations that plays your music every day, every week, but I know for a fact they're not reporting it. So I want to make some trouble, you know. Because I get, apart from being a teacher, I'm also a performing artist, and I produce and create my own music as well. So what can I do with them as well? Thank you.
Okay, so the second one is a quick one. You're probably referring to what we call community broadcasters. I think what we would do maybe is either chat to myself or Garabo, the gentleman who was here earlier. Maybe we can find out if they do have licenses, what the terms of those are, and then take it from there. Just make an assessment. Your first question is a little bit more difficult. So another complication with this thing is around the education sector, because like you've explained, there needs to be access to certain materials, right? The challenge that we have is that, and it's particularly with regards to, and where we're fighting, particularly with regards to materials at a university level, because those students, they need to use textbooks, right, that are prescribed for whatever course it is, and those textbooks have authors, right? And what in particularly SATU and COSATU are advocating for these bills to be passed is that they want their members, their teachers, etc., to have access to these textbooks for free. The problem is somebody's writing the book, somebody needs to get paid to write the book. That's where the tension is. And also, and this is it's so sad because there's so much disinformation out there are solutions to the problem that you are raising. Government actually has a budget. They just don't use that budget appropriately. But now they want to pass the pain on to creators of works, the writers of the works, who won't get remunerated. And then at a bigger level, that value chain includes publishing houses, who won't talk about capitalism, whatever, we'll leave that conversation out. But they have a business to run, and part of that business is ensuring that they're able to get an ROI, or return on investment, on the money that they spend to get a book published, marketing, distribute, all of that stuff that involves money, so there needs to be an ROI. But because, again, our government is not intentional, our government doesn't understand the repercussions of things, and our government doesn't use the resources, our taxes, appropriately, they create this problem and the tensions. So unfortunately, for the schools, under the current legal regime, if you don't have a license, and you're not paying for the use of the copyrighted works, you will hear from me.
And back for you.
I think there's another question.
Hi, Chola. Thank you so much for your presentation. I find the comments on the legislative framework quite interesting, and I'll tell you why. During my time as a legislator myself in the Western Cape Provincial Parliament, this copyright amendment bill went for public participation. And what you're raising as far as the legislative framework is quite interesting, because this would probably be a cross-cutting bill where it affects the Departments of Justice, Education, which sit outside the Economic Development Cluster, which was the champion of the bill from the National Assembly. And I would obviously, want to debate that in greater detail to you, because I don't think that's I might lose the room here. But the two questions that I asked from a bill writing perspective is this. Number one, how would we future-proof the copyright amendment bill to cover stuff like digital piracy and not collecting rights in a way that is so SAMRO is covered, as well as the originators and the creators of all creative works is covered. And the second question is, yes, I agree with you that the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture is fairly inept at covering this kind of bill, and the government of national unity itself has really difficulty in understanding which department or which cluster will champion this bill. The question though is, how do we deal with cross-cutting bills across these clusters in the government of national unity? And if this bill should be rejected by the Constitutional Court, which I believe it will be in its entirety, which clauses would you throw out and which would you leave? Thanks.
Okay, so for the first one, part of the legislative making process is that because legislation has an impact on society, the economy, depending on what it is, what is required to be done is what we call a socio-economic impact assessment study, where you actually assess the impact across the board, socio-economically, et cetera, of the legislation that you are drafting and have an understanding. And once you have an understanding of the landscape, it is then easier to legislate because you know what it is that you're legislating. They did a tick box exercise 4-pager, I think, and called it a socio-economic impact assessment study. They then, and this is why it was set back the first time, this bill is actually, so there are two types of bills, a Section 76 and a Section 75 bill. The one requires only national legislative involvement, and the other one requires provincial engagement. They only did it at a national level. And the thing with arts and culture is that it impacts different provinces differently. So that understanding was not there as well. And then the second time around, and which is where probably you were there when it came to the Western Cape, it went to each one of the provinces so that a presentation could be made that was tailor-fit perhaps for each province. So they did the process with the bill, but they still didn't do a socio-economic impact assessment study. And that is one of the fundamental reasons why it's drafted the way it's drafted. Future-proofing it is a little bit difficult because of the moving targets around digital consumption and what's happening there. So I think we would have to find a way that is not purely legislative to address some of those things. There might be industry interventions, there might be policy, other interventions, because the problem with lawmaking is that, as you can see, it takes so long, and to change it takes long. And people think you can fix it by having the regulations, but if it's not dealt with by the Principal Act, it's difficult with the regulations, and unless the regulations are espousing what's already been put in the principal thing. And sorry, I forgot the second question. Did we just repeat it?
Where would this bill sit?
And I've made this presentation. There needs to be an inter-ministerial task team put together to determine exactly where it must sit. I think it should still sit with a DTIC because of the economic components, but when they are drafting it, it needs to be dealt with at an inter-ministerial, inter-portfolio committee type structure so that they take all of these things into account. DSEC doesn't have the wherewithal for something like this because of the economic issues, but the other departments, for instance, the DOC can give input. There's already a white paper now in the AV sector which we've made comments on from a copyright perspective because they didn't have an IP element in there, which is important if you're going to be having that type of paper. So you need to have an interministerial, inter-portfolio committee type of structure in order to have this thing drafted, but I still think being championed by the DTIC, the problem that I have with the DTIC is that the same people who drafted that dog's breakfast are still there. So that becomes the problem. And obviously the challenges are when ministers are changing, etc., etc. But that's why we are here. And it's not just me, it's a whole bunch of lawyers and a whole bunch of other organizations to push that thing happens. But one thing that did happen in, I think 2 ministers ago in DTIC is that they were supposed to have put together an IP advisory committee. That never happened. That also became a political football. But I think you do need the right types of experts advising the drafters and even the legal advisor for Parliament to ensure that they draft this thing properly. But definitely I think you should still sit with DTIC.
Thank you so much. Chola, we got no more questions. The guy at the back was saying if he buy the CD and a copy like me, he's got the right to copy the CD. And I thought it was not that, right? Okay, so guys, I'm going to let Chola go. I know our next guest is ready and he's got the biggest pressure because the people at the back is...